Literati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 200. Before we get started, a quick reminder to follow the live stream on LinkedIn or YouTube. The topic today is why Agentic AI forces a rethink of least privilege. Our guest today, as many of you can see, is Eric Olden. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Mike, and such a big milestone for your show. I'm honored to be here on episode 200. That's great.
Yeah, I wanted to do something special for episode 200, and I might have said this the last time you were on, but Glue owes you a little bit of a debt because had it not been for Simplified, I might not have acknowledged that it was possible for some company other than Oracle, IBM, CA, to build an identity product. But seeing you guys like at Simplified at Digital Identity World, it sort of opened up this possibility that maybe there was room for more identity companies after that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think innovation comes from people who are looking to solve tomorrow's problem, and there's so many new problems. So I'm glad to see. I think you were saying 17 years. That's an awesome track record. So congratulations on perseverance and building great things.
yeah, I didn't announce it on LinkedIn this year because I wasn't sure if 17 years is like a good thing or a bad thing. Like we basically 17 years ago, we said I was really frustrated with the idea that we had these big platforms that didn't really innovate that much. And I felt like open source would lead to more innovation. And why wouldn't people want open source, like if it was available? And that thesis is pretty much still with us today, although so much has happened in the market since then. If you could just think back to 2009, it was like a totally different world. And actually, I wanted to start there because, congratulations on selling Strata to Rubrik and becoming part of Rubrik.
Thank you. That's a big news. We just announced it this week, so yeah, pretty excited about what we're going to do together.
Yeah, and that's your third exit. And so I thought now would be kind of a good time to just talk about the history of Strata because you started it in 2019. It's been about 6.5 years or so, I guess, or 7 years. And maybe you can just give us a picture of what changed. We talked about 2009 being a long time ago, but 2019 also seems like a long time ago. What changed, do you think, in those 7 years, and what stayed the same in those 7 years?
Yeah, well, going back to what we started the company, Strata, what we started it around was the premise that I saw when I was running identity for Oracle. Before that, there was a big push to go to the cloud, and everybody that was moving to the cloud, they were going to more than one cloud, and they didn't want to put all their eggs in any one basket. And so the challenge that happens when you move to AWS as well as Azure, Oracle's cloud, and all of these multiple platforms is that each of the platforms had a built-in identity system, and now you had all this fragmentation. And in order to solve that, we needed a different way to think about identity that wasn't yet another IDP. And so that became the kind of inspiration to create a abstraction layer that would virtualize multiple identity providers that would run in different locations. And that became the foundation for identity orchestration, which was the way that you make all of those different identity systems work together. And it very quickly moved from the big IDPs, put Okta in there as well, because they're a big player in there. And then start to think about all of the identity services, whether it's Hyper for strong authentication, various pieces. So you'd have a lot of different identity systems that people were trying to make work together. And so pulled a lot of inspiration from VMware, because what VMware had done around virtualizing hardware, and then ultimately virtualization became synonymous with software-defined X, right? So software-defined hardware, software-defined networking, software-defined storage, where all of a sudden, instead of dealing strictly with hardware, you could work with software and all the advantages that that gave you. So we really kind of used the orchestration because virtualization would have been too confusing. And where we ultimately wound up was in a world where we had this one layer of orchestration for identity, whether it's in the cloud or on premises, in everything in between. So, really focusing on the hybrid deployment of that. And we focus on the large enterprise because that's where my experience was mainly concentrated in my relationships and so forth. And so over the initial handful of years, we really kind of built that out. And then we started to see a lot of the capabilities once you're in software versus fragmentation, and started to realize that we could do things that previously you weren't able to do, like failover and continuity. So we started to add new capabilities that would work across different identity providers. And that then turned into, about 2.5 years ago, we started to see the rise of AI and realizing that AI created a whole new category of problems that are very identity centric, because now instead of having just humans that were accessing things, we started to have these agents, this software that was doing things on our behalf at a much higher scale and speed than what we had in the human world. And so that was kind of the third chapter in the strata evolution. Was started with orchestration, led to continuity, and then ultimately the agentic world as well. So doing all of that in about just under 7 years was a lot of fun, but kept us moving real fast.
Yeah. And when you started in 2019, I would say infrastructure and enterprise software was still in vogue. And we saw a lot of big fundings in those years, especially even in 2020 during the pandemic. But then at a certain point, the market sort of shifted away from infrastructure, and AI, agentic AI, or I should really say LLMs and generative AI started to suck all the oxygen, I think, out of the IT market and really hit infrastructure kind of hard. Um, and I'm wondering, um, did you also observe that type of shift going on, maybe around 2022, and then that caused you to have to sort of re-strategize around this new opportunity? And pivoting a business is the hardest thing in the world. And how did you handle that sort of new requirements and this new sort of business environment?
Yeah, it was exactly in 2022 when that shift happened. And, we saw a lot in 2021, some really big financings where people were raising hundreds of millions of dollars.
Like
And
Rich.
yeah, people like that, a number of them. And then ultimately in 2022, it shifted, as you said. And I think the focus became more on, in Strata, we were raising our Series B financing, which is arguably one of the most difficult ones to go the transition from finding product market fit to scaling out the business. And I think where we saw it in the financing side of the world was investor interest was um, moving. I would say this is pre 2023, right? So 2022 was this transition period, right? Where I think when ChatGPT came out in, I think it was like Thanksgiving, November of 2023, then that really, I think, began the era of the Gen AI. But what we were seeing in 2022 in the financing world was a combination of things that there was a shift away from infrastructure and the pent up demand that had happened over COVID. And now people were struggling with some very prosaic problems like high interest rates. And that changed a lot of the financing expectations on funding a startup. So I think 22, in my view, was more to do with some of the um, systemic financial market issues. And then 23, it shifted into more of the generative AI, and we haven't looked back. So I think that was less of a pivot for us around the that period, and more for us was around being efficient with the capital that we had raised. And we have great investors, and they were very supportive. And, so we were able to kind of make that transition and then kind of set us up for 2023 and the move into generative AI. And you're right that there today, if you don't have a real core AI in the DNA of your software, it's a very tough financing market. I will say that. And so I think where the future is going to be, everything's, AI is not going away. I think it's just now a lot of what we saw in 2024 and 2025 was a lot of hand wavy kind of things around AI that really were, in my opinion, not really showing usage of AI in the way that I think people need it to be today, and more people were putting AI in every pitch deck, and everything became like, hey, with now 23% more AI, which is really, I don't
Like
feel like
blockchain.
really, yeah, exactly. And the the separation of substance from hype, I think, is where we're at right now. And so I think in the market today, we have things that are really happening. And I think as an industry, we got to make it past this hype cycle where a lot of the AI and now agentic, uh, you know, people talking about it, but in the market with the customers, what they're implementing, that I think is where we need to really focus, is moving from pilots into production. And so the number of pilots that are out there and the amount of money that was thrown at anything that had AI inside the customer, inside the enterprise, there were unlimited budgets. And I think we're seeing collectively a move very quickly in 2026. So we're roughly halfway through the year, and things like token maxing, where people were bragging about how much AI they could use, and now they're getting the bill and they're saying, well, what did we get for the money that we spent? And so now the finance teams, and understandably, right, are looking for a return on that investment. And that's where we need to, as an industry, focus on making AI work and do things that mean something. And that, I think, is really the big test in the market, is how do we get these things to show a return, and move away from the AI whitewashing that I think a lot of people talk about. And as a father of a son who just graduated college, I can tell you there's a lot of palpable fear and concern around, hey, is AI taking all the jobs? And as someone who lives in this every day, I can say I don't see it that way. I don't believe it's a zero sum game. And what I tell my son and his friends is, don't fear it, embrace it, and figure out how to use it, because it's like electricity or any other tool. It's not going away, and it doesn't mean a zero sum game, but the people who know how to actually do stuff with it are going to be able to create a lot of new industries, new capabilities, and new jobs. And I think the fear of AI, the backblast or back blowback that people are seeing right now about AI is there's a lot of problems. I won't say it's all sunny and rainbows, but I think there's a real need to use it and learn from it, and it's not about firing people because you have AI. And I personally believe that that's not what's been going on. I think people, you know, organizations that say, hey, did all these layoffs because of AI. I'm not seeing it, and I'm working with some of the most advanced users of the AI, and it's not like it's at a level where it's replacing jobs. I do think that there's a narrative that fits Wall Street that says, "Hey, I can replace humans with code, and all of a sudden we're going to have better margins." I don't think I don't think that's actually
Yeah,
happening
I like to
as much
say
as others.
humans still have a lot of processing power. I saw a good YouTube segment about one cubic millimeter of mouse brain. They sectioned it and tried to count all the neurons, and they talked about how many petabytes of of storage that took in the cloud. And so, and then it doesn't, that's only counting the neurons. They didn't actually calculate the interaction of proteins like adrenaline on those neurons. And so there's the human brain is still has a huge amount of capacity and processing power. We're not as good at staying on task as AI, but but silicon has yet to match our processing. So there's definitely still a room for humans. But I wanted to pivot a little bit towards the identity authorization governance sort of challenge that we're facing. And I think it's a great privilege to live right now because we're living in this time of this great transformation. And we've already had the luck to live through another really big transformation, which was the connectivity transformation in the 90s with the introduction of the internet was really like a good time to be in, starting your career. And now we're in the second phase where we have this other really huge transformation of LLMs enabling us to do new types of things. But when I look at the impact of identity, authorization, and governance, what I see is a lot of movement and action in the identity part. How are we going to identify, authenticate, discover? What are the tokens going to look like? What are the flows going to look like? So there's a lot of activity in the identity part. In the authorization part, Strata had, remember Jerry Gable introduced the Hexa project? I'm sure you remember. And so I saw Strata as sort of playing in the authorization part a little bit, which is probably important for the orchestration mission. And then finally, there's the governance part of if even if you can identify and make policies, how do you know you have the right policies? If you have the wrong
Hmm.
policies, it doesn't matter if you identify people well. And so at a certain level, you just have to know, like, did we actually mitigate the risk to the biggest risks with the biggest business impact? And so maybe you could give your comments on like where are we in those three sort of big lenses? Like how are we doing adjusting to this new agentic challenge?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I think the through line of those three lenses is visibility. And a big part of why we built Hexa was a open source implementation of the IDQL standard. And what we did with IDQL was to take the opaque policies that are in all of these cloud platforms and make it visible so that you could read it as a human and not have to interact with it strictly through an API. And so, what Hexa would do would be to pull out of, say, Azure, all of the policies that governed access to resources, make it visible in YAML and allow you to then say, understand what's going on, but then also be able to translate the Azure into AWS so that you could have the same policy in two places, even though the two cloud systems would implement it in their own respective way. So the big point there is that if you can't see it, it's hard to understand it. So let's start with visibility, and then you can start to govern it because you have something that you can do governance on. And I think as you expand that into the AI world, we have a similar challenge. Is that um, in the large language models, and I think it's really interesting. I think it was last week. or this week when Anthropic released Fable, their version 5. And inside of Fable is it's a mythos based version of Claude. And I'm bringing this up because as you work with it, there are guardrails that Anthropic has put inside of it to prevent people from using it to do bad things, namely within biology, so people can't use AI to build a bioweapon, but also security and identity and the world that I live in. And it's interesting that I'll be working with it and I'll get a notification that says that Claude is going to downgrade the model I'm using because it is sensing that I'm going in a direction that it doesn't want to use the real powerful uh, Fable model on, and they'll downgrade you to Opus 4.8, I think is the one that I've been seeing it go to. Why did it do that, right? I'm not looking to create a hacking tool, right? I do very identity oriented things, right? Dealing with protocols like OAuth and things of that type. But it's interesting that Anthropic, are trying to, in their own way, treat it as a black box. And I don't know why and what their governance guardrails are. I just know when I bump into it and I think, oh, that's odd. I don't know the rationale of why the model decided that what I was doing is going to maybe go in a wrong direction. So that again makes it black box, makes it opaque. And so as you think about the other part of it is that in using the some of these models, that they will do retention of your prompts and the data that you're processing. And that creates a lot of concerns for someone like myself on a privacy and compliance standpoint, where if we're leaking IP into these models, um, that's problematic. So all of it comes together to say we need to be able to govern and understand these things, and we need to understand and have visibility into what's happening there. So I feel like the move into black box world is at odds with having good governance because it works against the visibility. So that's something I've just seen in the last couple of days in this, and I think there's really good reasons that Anthropic is doing that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have guardrails. I'm just saying that we as an industry need to figure out how do we balance the visibility so we understand why things are happening, and then balance the control over the data. Because if I know with our customers, if all of their data went into the cloud, that would be a non-starter for a lot of the use cases. So I think it's going to be an interesting year or so. Who knows? It's moving so fast. It could be as different in 6 months as it was 2 years ago. So yeah, a lot of interesting things that are happening. What are you saying?
Well, actually, I want to pivot into least privilege. I think you're pretty on target. I definitely agree with your take on transparency, and in the group that we're starting called GovOps, actually we define governance as and we define transparency as one of the essential layers for governance. So we define the layers of governance as well: your governance layer, your identity layer, your transparency layer, your event layer, and your resilience layer. So I'm very aligned. I think what you're saying is true, there's you don't generally say this system is non-transparent and it's really well governed. Like nobody wants a non-transparent system. So I think I'm very, very aligned with that. But I wanted to pivot. We're trying to keep this short today because I appreciate that you're on a tight schedule. You just sold Rubik. I'm surprised you're even sold to Rubik. I'm surprised you're even doing this interview. But I loved your activism as a CEO, sort of also as a lead product evangelist. As somebody who does a lot of product evangelism myself, and one of the things that you were talking about was you were sort of throwing some dirt on least privilege, which I happen to align with a lot. I mean, I like the idea of least privilege. I just don't think least privilege, it's not a strategy. It's sort of like a state that you want, but it's not a strategy for how to control or how to make your authorization policies. But maybe we could just spend the last couple of minutes on that because I feel like if we don't address it, I haven't done justice to the title of the episode. Um, so, what was your problem with least privilege?
Well, my problem, I think, what I'll say is this, is that I think a lot of people just assume that what worked in the past is going to work today. And I think we need to recognize is that things are happening very differently in an agentic world. The speed at which things are happening is measured in seconds. It's not in, days or even weeks that we used to have time to detect and recover from problems. So I think we need to recognize that we have to be proactive and preemptive. And so the idea that we're going to create a lot of standing privileges that are going to be reliably and responsibly used is at odds with the way that agents work. And so you think about the scale and the blast radius that happens with agents when something goes wrong, it can go very wrong very quickly and have a broad impact. And I think we've all collectively seen stories of OpenClaw, and I'm not surprised that it's gone off the rails because it wasn't designed with security and control in mind. It was designed with convenience. And so I think there's a place for those types of things, but you need to think about how do you control these in a scalable way. And I think it comes down to a control plane. And where you think about the control plane of the rules and the policies, if you can't control the agents and the AI models themselves, because that's the responsibility of the platform providers or the model builders, but what you can do is protect the data and the APIs and the tools that these agents are calling. And that's the important piece, is that we can't throw our hands in the air and say, oh, these models are so powerful, we're going to give up. I think you need to flip the model around and say, look, what can we protect? And so by having a policy and a series of, we're back to proxies again, right? Gateways and proxies, and being able to create safe environments to protect and control how access is for an agent as well as a human, how that happens, and doing that where you have a policy-based model to control how data is accessed and used. And then the mechanisms at which the agents come in are different than the way that people have come in historically. And so agents need to think in terms of, tokens and standards, right? So if you look at the way that it does work, and we have customers that are using this today, is to reduce the tokens to be very fine grained to a specific tool call and to a very short duration of, say, 5 seconds or less. So this way you don't have a bunch of standing permissions that, I feel it's like leaving a loaded gun outside of your control. It's a matter of time before the wrong person finds that and does something bad with it. So if you think about that metaphor, maybe you can't control whether people have guns around, but you can control whether there are bullets in them. And so if you take control of the bullet and say, hey, this can only be used in certain scenarios, then that makes the gun a lot less formidable as a weapon, because it doesn't have the ability to do what it's going to, ultimately be used for. And so that's where I think we need to move, is to reduce standing privileges, to make it very scoped, and to reduce the amount of time at which people or agents are going to be able to do something with it. So that's, I think, the philosophy that I have seen work.
Well, I'm glad I had you on the show because that is sort of the message I was trying to convey. And I like how you phrase it when you say we can't necessarily control all the identities, especially if these are ephemeral identities that are created on the fly. We can't have a manager review that, but it might the agent might be only live for 5 minutes. We can't send a manager or an access certification request for it. So that side of the equation has become much more dynamic, but we still have control over the the stuff that you can do, the tools that you can call, the APIs, and what I call the capabilities, the
Mhm.
actions on the resources. What can you search this database, or can you make this MCP call, which is connected to these resources? So I think that vision is very aligned, and that's the reason I wanted to actually have this conversation on least privilege. It's not that least privilege is bad. No, least privilege is good. Like that is your ideal state, but it's not a strategy. It should be like a characteristic of a well-built system should be that least privilege is in place. And tokens, as you say, I like that idea. Although I've come to be more sort of accepting of other sources of truth. I think in addition to tokens, we have graphs, because graphs
Mm.
tokens have a certain size limitation, but graphs can contain a vast amount of data. Like, can you edit this document? Well, all the documents in Google is huge. So sometimes we need persistence. And I see graphs filling a niche for those types of facts. And also for trusted data pipelines between companies, sometimes providing facts that can be trusted in real time. Um, but this idea that we need to control the things that the capabilities, let's call them, versus the identities, that's the core idea of GovOps. And I think it's interesting where least privilege sort of fits in there. Um, so let me just give you a last couple of minutes. Anything else? Last thoughts before we break?
Well, I think your philosophy on GovOps, I'm really interested to see how you develop that, because I do think that we need to incorporate new frameworks and paradigms that are solving the problems that we deal with today and in the future. I've seen just in my own personal close to 30 years in identity, a lot of the stuff that we used in the past isn't serving us anymore. So I'm excited to see what GovOps looks like, and how this all is going to scale and help us solve the problems of scale and speed that AI agents bring. So I can't wait to see what you do with it, Mike.
Okay, and one last question. Are you going to Identiverse next week?
I think so. So if we can, let's meet up.
Okay, so you're buying, since you just sold Strata. You can buy overpriced drinks in Las Vegas, or overpriced coffee in probably a coffee is $20 in Las Vegas. So great. Well, we'll see you there. And just a reminder to the audience: no episodes planned next week. Although I might do um, some I guess um, what's the right word, on the fly um, live streams. I'm going to bring my camera, but nothing planned. And so with that, just another quick reminder: please follow us to see more great episodes like this. And thank you so much, Eric, for making time in your busy day today. And hopefully I'll get a chance to see you at Identiverse next week. So,
Excellent. Thanks for having me. Great show. Appreciate it.
okay. All right. See you next time.